Colorado Territory, May 1872. The wind swept red dust across the parched grasslands outside Trinidad as Seraphina Tilden sat stiff in the back of a black carriage, hands clenched in her lap under layers of lace and ivory silk. Her wedding dress scratched her skin and her lungs felt tight, like they were trying to escape her chest. She was 23, and today she was supposed to marry Baron Alphonse Renaud, a man twice her age with money, land, and a cruel reputation everyone in town pretended not to know. Her father had shook hands with the Baron last winter after a string of bad cattle deals left the Tilden ranch near ruin. Seraphina was the price of saving it. She had tried to run once, 2 weeks ago. She had packed her mother's old brooch, a bottle of water, and a loaf of bread and made it as far as the San Pedro foothills before 2 of the Baron's men dragged her back. She still had the bruises on her arms. The carriage rocked to a stop in front of the church. The Baron stood waiting at the steps, dressed in black, his mouth twisted in a tight line like he was already bored. He did not offer his hand. He just stared, calculating. "I will not do it," Seraphina whispered, her voice shaking. The driver opened the door. Her father stood a few steps away, face pale, eyes somewhere far away. He did not look at her. Her mother was long gone, buried in the dry earth beneath the cottonwood trees behind their ranch house. Seraphina took a step back inside the carriage, and then a shot rang out. The church bell cracked from the bullet. Screams broke out around the square. A horse whinnied. Then another shot, this one closer, and Seraphina's heart jumped as the Baron's hat flew from his head. "Get down," someone shouted. A rider charged into the square from the south, dust trailing behind his horse. He wore a battered brown coat, dark hair whipping across his forehead, and a rifle slung over his back. His eyes locked with hers, deep, steady, and full of something she had not seen in weeks. Not pity, not fear, a dare. "Get on," he shouted. Seraphina did not think. She bolted from the carriage, silk skirts tearing as she ran toward him. The Baron's men reached for their holsters, but the rider fired once more into the ground and they ducked. He rode close, leaned down, and grabbed her arm. In one pull, she was up behind him, clinging to his back as the horse galloped out of the square and toward the open plains. They did not speak for miles. Wind howled past them, and Seraphina held tight to the stranger's coat, her cheek pressed to his shoulder. She did not cry. She had no tears left. They rode until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and violet. He finally pulled the horse to a stop near a line of cottonwoods by a slow-moving creek. He swung down first, then helped her off. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, brushing dirt from her dress. "I think so." He looked at her for a long second. "Name's Isaiah Sutton," she hesitated. "Seraphina Tilden." Isaiah blinked, then gave a slow nod like he already knew. "I heard what that man was about. Sorry it came to this." "You do this often?" she asked, voice flat. "Steal women from weddings." Isaiah cracked a smile, brief but real. "Only when they look like they want to run." Seraphina glanced down at her ruined dress and bare, blistered feet. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere he will not find you." Isaiah started unsaddling his horse, movements sure and quiet. "You got anyone else?" "No," she wrapped her arms around herself. "Just me now." He did not ask more. They camped by the creek that night. Isaiah built a fire with practiced ease, and Seraphina sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest. Her dress was torn and stained, her hair a mess of pins and dust. Isaiah never looked away. "You were not scared back there," she said softly. He shrugged. "Been scared before." "Does not help much." "Why did you do it?" He looked at her then, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Because no one else was going to." She stared at him, something in her chest loosening. She had spent months being told what to do, where to go, who to become. This man, this runaway cowboy, had told her nothing. He had only offered his hand. They rode west the next morning. Isaiah said he had a cabin near the Sangre de Cristos where the Baron's reach did not stretch. It was slow travel. Seraphina's feet were raw, and Isaiah found her a pair of old boots from his saddlebag. Too big, but better than nothing. He gave her a worn duster to replace the wedding dress, and she burned the silk that night without saying a word. The cabin sat in a grove of aspens, rough-hewn and small but clean. There was a pump out back, a wood stove inside, and a narrow loft above the main room. Isaiah gave her the bed. He slept on the floor for days. They barely spoke. Still, Seraphina watched him. He was quiet but gentle with his hands. He carved a new handle for her boot one morning without being asked. He made coffee at dawn and left a cup for her on the windowsill. He never touched her, never looked at her like the Baron had. One morning she asked, "Why are you out here?" Isaiah paused, then said, "I used to work for a cattle outfit down south. Boss was mean, beat folks, took what he wanted. One day I left, been running since." Seraphina nodded. "We are both running then." He looked at her. "You do not have to anymore." She stared into the fire. "I do not know how to live free." Isaiah set down his cup. "You learn one day at a time." She looked at him, and something shifted. That night she did not go to the bed. She sat beside him on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, and leaned her head on his shoulder. He froze at first, then relaxed. When she reached for his hand, he took it. Neither of them said anything. She fell asleep like that. And in the morning, when she woke, Isaiah was still there, her hand still in his. The Baron never stopped searching. Word came through a trapper that he had sent men as far west as Santa Fe. Isaiah taught her to shoot. They built a fence around the cabin together. She helped clean fish from the creek and learned how to mend his shirts. They laughed more, and one evening, as the sky turned orange and the world turned soft, Isaiah touched her jaw and kissed her. It was slow, careful. Her fingers clutched the front of his shirt, and she did not pull away. When he breathed her name, she closed her eyes and pressed herself closer. She had never been kissed like that. They stood there a long time, lips brushing, hands holding, hearts steady. Isaiah whispered, "You are free now, Seraphina." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "I know." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. By early June, the snowmelt had turned the mountain streams fast and clear. The cottonwoods leafed out in bright green, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth and pine sap. Seraphina stood at the edge of the garden bed, sleeves rolled to her elbows, knees pressed into the loamy soil. Isaiah had shown her how to space the seeds with her fingers, how to press them just deep enough for the roots to take. Squash and pole beans, mostly. There was no rush in the way he taught, only steadiness, like everything worth doing took time. She wiped her hands on her skirt and rose slowly. Her back ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from building something that might last. Isaiah was mending the roof again. A storm had rolled through the night before, and a few shingles had loosened. From where she stood, she could see the careful set of his shoulders as he hammered, the quiet patience in his movements. His jacket was slung over a fence post, and the sun caught the edge of an old scar along his forearm, pale against his skin. He didn't notice her watching until the hammer paused. "You reckon squash'll do well up this high?" she asked. He looked over his shoulder. "If we keep the rabbits out. You planning to shoot every one of them, just the ones that don't understand a fence?" She smiled and walked toward the house. Inside, the air held the faint scent of smoke and flour. The bread she had baked that morning sat cooling on the table, and a peach in the corner basket had started to soften. She reached for it and sliced it thin, careful not to waste a bite. When Isaiah came in, he set his tools on the shelf by the door. His boots were dusty, and a streak of pine pitch darkened his shirt. His eyes found the peach slices laid out on the tin plate. "You always feed folks like that, or am I just lucky?" "I didn't say it was for you." He leaned against the table, arms folded. "You didn't say it wasn't." She offered him a slice without meeting his gaze. He took it, and their fingers brushed for a blink, just enough to stir something low and quiet in her chest. "You ever think about leaving the territory altogether?" she asked, her voice almost too low to hear. His brow furrowed. "Why? Just wondering if there's places where no one's ever heard of a man like Renaud." Isaiah chewed slowly, then nodded. "Maybe, but trouble don't always come from men like him. Sometimes it's the land, drought, fever, rail companies laying track where folks already live. You can't outrun it all." "I don't want to outrun it," she said. "I just want to know what's mine." He looked at her like he was weighing something. "What do you think that is?" She didn't answer right away. "A piece of earth I can stand on without asking permission." "A set of days that belong to me." Isaiah's eyes softened. "That's not small." It used to feel impossible. It still might be, but it's worth trying. Later that afternoon, they walked to the far edge of the clearing where the trees thickened and the slope dipped toward the river. Isaiah carried a rifle slung over his shoulder, more out of habit than fear. Seraphina picked wild chamomile as they went, tying the stems in a loose bundle for drying. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. "To what? Anything, the life before." He shook his head. "Nothing back there I want." She touched a low, hanging branch, fingertips brushing the pale bark. "My mother used to say a person wasn't a tree, that we don't have to stay rooted where we're planted." She sounded like someone who knew she was. Until she got sick. Isaiah didn't speak, but he reached out and plucked a burr from the hem of her dress, flicking it aside gently. The gesture said enough. That evening, the wind picked up again, but it was warm, and the sky turned deep violet behind the mountains. They sat on the porch steps, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. She could hear the slow rhythm of his breathing and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. "You ever wish you'd done something different?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. "I wish I'd left sooner. From the cattle outfit, from the man I used to be." She turned her face toward him. "You're not that man anymore." Isaiah looked at her then, and the way he did it made her feel like the rest of the world had gone still. "Neither are you." The quiet between them wasn't heavy, it was full. She reached for his hand, and he laced their fingers together with a tenderness that made her throat tighten. "I want to stay," she whispered, "if you'll let me." He turned her hand in his, pressed it to his chest. "You're not a guest here, Seraphina. This is your home if you want it." She leaned in and kissed him, not with urgency, but with the certainty of someone who had walked through fire and found herself whole on the other side. The stars came out slowly, one by one, and neither of them moved. By late June, sunlight lingered past supper, and the days stretched wide and slow. Seraphina worked beside Isaiah to cut and stack firewood, her palms calloused now, her shoulders stronger. The ache in her arms no longer felt like a burden but a sign of something earned. She no longer flinched at the sound of boots outside the cabin or startled when the wind shifted. Her body had started to trust the quiet. Isaiah returned from a trip to the trading post near La Veta with a sack of flour, a length of muslin, and a small tin of lamp oil. He also brought back news that stirred the air between them like thunder too far off to hear but not to feel. "They're saying Renaud's lost his claim on the Tilden land," Isaiah said, setting the supplies on the table. "Bank wouldn't extend his line. Too much gone to bribes and whiskey, not enough cattle to back it." Seraphina looked up from the basin where she was rinsing greens. "Then it wasn't just about me." Isaiah wiped the dust from his neck with the edge of his bandana. "You were part of how he kept the illusion. A respectable man with a young wife tied to old ranching names. That's gone now." She turned back to the water. "He'll still be angry, likely. But angry men don't always have reach." That night, as dusk cooled the edges of the world, Seraphina sat on the cabin's stoop threading a needle through the muslin Isaiah had brought. She was making a curtain to hang by the sleeping loft, careful to stitch evenly, her brow furrowed in concentration. Isaiah came up beside her with a tin mug and passed it to her. "There's a barn down farther in the valley," he said. "Half fallen, but the stone's good. I was thinking we could rebuild it, keep a few goats, maybe chickens." Seraphina set the sewing aside. "You mean to stay here through winter, if you want to?" She studied his face, the way the last of the light caught in the creases near his eyes. "What if I said I did? I'd start cutting more timber." She took a sip from the mug. The tea was strong, bitter with pine needles, but it warmed her all the way down. "And if I said I wanted more than goats and chickens?" Isaiah didn't answer right away. He sat beside her, elbows on his knees. "Say what it is, plain." She folded the muslin in her lap. "I want a life that doesn't vanish the second someone stronger lays claim to it. I want a home no one can barter me for, and I want it with you." Isaiah turned toward her fully, his voice low. "You already have it, Seraphina. Every piece of it if you want to make it ours." She leaned into him, resting her cheek against his shoulder. "Then let's build it." The next morning, Isaiah led her down the trail to the old barn. The roof sagged, half the walls had fallen inward, and grass grew through the cracks in the stone foundation. Still, the bones were strong. He walked the perimeter, pointing out what could be salvaged. "If we tear out the far wall, we'll have room for a stall and a feed room," he said. "We can haul in new beams from the ridge." Seraphina knelt to pull weeds from between the stones. "I'll check the chimney. If it draws, we could set up a stove in here, use it as a second shelter." They worked until midday, sweat streaking their faces, hands gritty with years of dust. When they paused to drink from the canteen, Isaiah leaned against the beam beside her. "You ever think about teaching?" he asked. She raised a brow. "Teaching what? Reading, tending herbs, any of what you know." "There's children in the valleys below who don't have schools." She tilted her head, considering. "I'd never thought I had anything worth passing on." "You do." She looked at him then, and he didn't look away. Later that week, the first hard rain of summer came fast and heavy. They barely made it back to the cabin before the downpour hit, stacking kindling inside the door, clothes soaked through. Seraphina peeled off her wet dress by the stove while Isaiah turned away to hang his coat. She slipped into one of his shirts, the sleeves long, the hem brushing her knees. When she came to stand beside him, he still faced the fire. "You can look," she said. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over her with a kind of reverence that made her chest tighten. "You look like you belong here. I finally feel like I do." He stepped closer, his hand brushing a damp curl from her cheek. "You know what I want," she nodded. "Say it anyway. I want to marry you, not in town, not in front of anyone, just me and you somewhere quiet." "I want to know it's real," her throat tightened. "I never thought I'd want that again." He took her hands. "Then maybe it's time we make something new of it." She kissed him then, slow, sure, with no fear in her mouth. When they lay together that night, it wasn't hurried. It was steady and full of breath, of palms exploring slowly, of lips finding skin like they were learning it for the first time. Outside, the rain softened into a hush, and the trees bent gently in the wind. The next morning, Isaiah carved 2 rings from the heartwood of a fallen cottonwood. He slid one onto her finger beside the fire, and she tied his around a thin leather cord he wore under his shirt. They didn't speak vows. They didn't need to, they had already lived them. By early July, the earth had hardened beneath the long sun, and the wild grasses stood waist-high, swaying in slow rhythm every time the wind shifted down from the peaks. The barn's stone walls were nearly rebuilt now, and Seraphina could drive a nail clean without bending it. Her hands were steady, her shoulders browned by the sun, and when Isaiah passed her the last beam for the roof brace, she met his eyes without hesitation. "Almost feels like it's always been here," he said, nodding to the frame. "Maybe it just needed the right hands," she said, checking the angle with the square. They worked until the light slanted low and gold, then walked the trail back toward the cabin, their tools slung in canvas sacks over their backs. A pair of sandhill cranes lifted from the creek, their wings wide and slow in the sky. Seraphina paused to watch them, the corner of her mouth lifting. Isaiah followed her gaze. "You ever think about starting a school out here? Not just teaching a few something regular." She kept her eyes on the birds. "I'd need slates, books, a place to hold lessons." He shifted the weight of the sack across his shoulder. "There's a family I met down the valley a year back, the Barlows, 4 children, oldest maybe 12. They used to hire a tutor from Trinidad, but the man stopped coming. They might be willing to share a corner of their barn." Seraphina ran her hand along the bark of a nearby aspen. "You think they'd trust someone like me? They'll see what I see." That evening, Seraphina spread the muslin curtain across the table and traced over the stitched hem with her fingertips. Isaiah was oiling the hinges of a salvaged door, the room quiet save for the soft scrape of cloth and metal. "Would you mind if I rode down to the Barlows' place tomorrow?" she asked. Isaiah didn't look up. "Take the mare, she's calm." "You don't think it's too soon?" He set the oil tin aside. "You've lived harder days than that ride." She breathed in deep, the scent of pine pitch still lingering on her sleeves. "What do I even say to a family like that? Say what you know, that's enough." The next morning, she saddled the mare just after sunup, the hills still pale with mist. Isaiah handed her a rolled blanket and a satchel of dried apples and cornmeal. He didn't say anything else, but when she turned to go, He rested a hand at the small of her back and held it there for a moment longer than needed. The ride took the better part of 2 hours, winding along narrow deer trails and scattering quail from the underbrush. When she reached the Barlows' homestead, the children were out front feeding chickens, and a woman in a broad-brimmed hat stood on the porch. A rifle leaned casually against the wall behind her. Seraphina dismounted, smoothing her skirt. The woman watched her approach without alarm, her eyes steady, mouth unreadable. "I'm not selling anything," Seraphina said. "I came to offer something instead." The woman raised an eyebrow. "That's so. I can read, write, and reckon numbers. I was raised on a ranch, so I know hard work. I'm not from any mission or town school, but I've taught myself more than I was ever given." One of the girls stepped closer, barefoot in the dust. "Mama, she talks like the books." The woman looked Seraphina up and down again. "What's your name?" "Seraphina Sutton." The woman's mouth curved just slightly. "You married?" "I am." "Then you know how to keep a promise." "I do." The woman nodded once. "Come back next Sunday. Bring what you have." Seraphina rode home with the sun warm at her back and the mare's hooves steady beneath her. When she crested the ridge and saw the smoke curling from the chimney, her chest tightened not with fear, but with something she hadn't known how to name until now. Belonging. Isaiah was splitting kindling near the porch. He looked up as she approached and didn't ask anything until she slid down from the saddle and stepped close. "They want me to come back next Sunday," she said. He set the axe aside. "Then we'll ride together." She glanced up at him. "You sure you want to be seen with a schoolteacher?" He took her face in his hands, his touch rough from the work of the day, and kissed her like it was the only answer worth giving. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I never knew the world could get wider after being broken." He held her there, quiet and still. "That's when it does." The rains came heavier in August, scenting the earth with damp cedar and pulling new shoots from the soil around the barn. Seraphina stood barefoot beneath the lean-to, her skirt hem dark with mud, watching Isaiah hitch a fresh beam into place above the goat pen. A fine mist clung to his hair, and the quiet between them felt like the breath before a song. She stepped over the puddled ground and held the brace steady as he tightened the last bolt. "Barlows sent word," she said. "2 more families plan to bring their children next Sunday." Isaiah glanced down, his knuckles streaked with dirt. "You worried it's moving too fast?" She shook her head. "I'm not afraid of too much anymore, just want to be useful." "You are," he said, tightening the last turn. "You're building something that might outlast both of us." She leaned her shoulder against the post as he stepped back. "I want to teach them how to ask questions. Not just letters and numbers, I want them to know they're allowed to wonder." Isaiah's mouth twitched in something close to a grin, but softer. "You ever think you were meant for this?" "No," she said. "But I think I grew into it." Inside the cabin that evening, a low wind pressed against the shutters, and the lamp on their table burned steady despite it. Isaiah was bent over a ledger, checking fence measurements and planning feed stores. Seraphina turned the pages of a second-hand reader she'd traded for at the post, her fingers tracing the margins where other hands had once scribbled crooked letters. "You write anything yet?" he asked without looking up. "I started a primer," she said, "for the youngest ones. Just simple sounds and drawings. I thought I'd try sewing the binding with coarse twine." He nodded. "You want help with the drawings?" "I didn't know you could draw." "I can't," he said, setting the pencil down, "but I can try." "You do most the rest." She laughed under her breath and slid the book toward him. "Try a chicken." He gave it a go, tongue pressed to the edge of his teeth in concentration. The result was lopsided and missing a foot, but she touched the page gently and said, "It'll do." Lightning cracked far off in the hills, and he looked toward the window. "You ever miss the noise of town?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I miss music." Isaiah pushed back from the table. "There's a fiddle in the attic," she blinked. "What?" "Left by the man who built this place. I found it wrapped in oilcloth behind the stove pipe last winter." She stood slowly. "Why didn't you mention it?" "Didn't think I could play." "You can't," she said, already moving toward the ladder. "But I can." They spent the rest of the night by candlelight, Seraphina coaxing sound from the old strings, bow trembling at first, then steadying. She played slow, mournful pieces at first, tunes her mother used to hum while darning shirts. Isaiah sat close, head tilted, listening like each note pulled something loose from the air. She shifted into a rounder tune, one meant for dancing, and he stood, offering his hand. She let the fiddle rest against her lap and took it. They moved in a slow circle across the worn boards, boots brushing, her hand on his shoulder, his at her waist. "You're braver than you think," he said just above her ear. She leaned into him. "Only since I met you?" "No," he said. "You were brave long before." The next morning brought clear skies and a hush to the trees, as if the land had taken a long breath and now waited. Isaiah rode out early to check the fence lines, and Seraphina stayed behind to finish the primer. She sat cross-legged on the floor, back against the hearth, sewing the last of the twine through the spine. When he returned near midday, he carried a bundle under one arm. "You left something," he said. She raised an eyebrow. He pulled free a length of folded cotton, soft, faded, stitched with careful seams. "Found it in the trading post bin. It's the same color as the sky when it clears after rain." She took the dress from his hands, fingers brushing the fabric. "Why?" he shrugged. "Figured you might want something new, for the first day of the school." She looked at him, the way his eyes held hers without apology. "You're not a man of many words." "No," he said, "but I know how to make something with my hands. And I know how to stay." She stepped close, resting her hands against his chest. "That's all I ever needed." That Sunday, she wore the dress and rode beside him to the valley. 12 children sat cross-legged in the Barlow's barn, eyes wide, fingers twitching with nervous energy. Seraphina passed out slates and chalk, and Isaiah helped hang the curtain she'd stitched as a makeshift blackboard. When the lesson began, she didn't think of what she'd left behind or what could go wrong. She thought only of the children's faces, of the warmth of Isaiah's hand wrapped around hers before she stepped forward, and the way the world had opened to her not all at once but gently, like dawn. That fall, they built a second structure near the edge of the clearing, a single-room schoolhouse with a stone chimney and 2 windows facing east. Isaiah carved the lintel beam himself and etched their initials into the wood, small and quiet. They married again that winter, under the aspens with snow tucked into the branches and only the Barlows as witness. Seraphina wore a shawl she'd woven from scraps, and Isaiah wore his best shirt, patched at the elbow but clean. They spoke no vows, just held hands and nodded, the silence between them full of everything they already knew. Years passed and the school grew. More families came, and children learned to write their names and ask questions about stars and rivers, and why birds flew in certain shapes. Seraphina taught each with the same care she gave her garden, and Isaiah kept the land steady beneath their feet. They never built a bigger house. They didn't need one. In the evenings, she played the fiddle and he read aloud from the ledger, now used for stories instead of fence lines. They sat close, knees touching, the fire warm and quiet. They grew older but not apart. And when the first child born in the valley school called her teacher with pride, Seraphina smiled and looked out over the hills, her hand resting in Isaiah's. She had found her place. And she was never taken from it again.